Hello, class. Good afternoon. The social activist that I shall be highlighting tonight, in many regards, could be said to be the most influential writer, poet, novelist, essayist, and lecturer of the early 1950s, or I should say the 1950s and the early 1960s, in regards to the civil rights movement. James Baldwin shared the stage with the likes of great political activists during the civil rights movement, such as Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. What set James Baldwin apart from the rest, or from those two, was his ability to write and his unique ability to penetrate to the wide audience so they could also understand the strife that a lot of African Americans were dealing with during this time. So he began as a young writer. He was granted a fellowship and moved to France, where he found the spatial clarity and the opportunity to write about a lot of social issues that is hard to write when you're involved, like he explains. Short introduction of his life. He was born in 1924 in Harlem, New York. Oldest of 9 children, son to a minister in a Pentecostal church. There he would find his voice that would allow him to be able to penetrate so many people. One of the major essays he wrote was called "The Fire Next Time." This essay comprised of 2 essays. The first was a letter to his nephew, and this letter is meant to, I guess, prepare him for what to expect as a young African male growing up in that time in America. A great quote from the book is this one here. Quote, "The American Negro has the great advantage of having never believed the collection of myths to which white Americans cling, that their ancestors were all freedom, loving heroes, that they were born in the greatest country the world has ever seen, or that Americans are invincible in battle and wise in peace, that Americans have always dealt honorably with Mexicans and Indians and all other neighbors or inferiors, that American men are the world's most direct and virile, that American women are pure. Negroes know far more about white Americans than that. It can almost be said, in fact, that they know about white Americans what parents, or anyways, mothers, know about their children, and that they very often regard white Americans that way. And perhaps this attitude, held in spite of what they know and have endured, helps to explain why Negroes, on the whole, and ultimately lately, have allowed themselves to feel so little hatred. The tendency has really been, insofar as this was possible, to dismiss white people as the slightly mad victims of their own brainwashing. James Baldwin also used his writing skills not only to tackle social issues regarding the civil rights, but social issues regarding equality and sexual orientation. He himself was a gay man, and one of the more controversial writings that he did was called Giovanni's Basement. The plot of the story is an all-white cast of characters. A gentleman named David has a girlfriend named Helen. Helen moves away to Spain for a couple weeks. David meets a man named Giovanni. They have this love affair in Giovanni's basement. What's interesting is that James Polchin summarized the title to be a simile. I quote, "This room with its paradoxical meaning of protective isolation and prison. Just kind of shows how during the time James Baldwin had to be hidden in this basement and ultimately hide away his feelings. Spoiler alert, the story ends. He returns to Helen, who leaves him after figuring out that he had a love affair with Giovanni. Giovanni tragically dies, and David is left alone. To summarize James Baldwin's work, I would like to read an assortment of quotes that resonate with me. Beginning with this: I was free only in battle, never free to rest, and he who finds no way to rest cannot long survive the battle. That quote, I could argue, speaks to the upward battle and the hardships a lot of African Americans had to endure living in the United States. And that feeling of not being able to rest comes with the never changing situations in which racism can occur. Another quote that was interesting goes as follows: this problem, which they invented in order to safeguard their purity, has made of them criminals and monsters, and it is destroying them. This is a powerful quote by James Baldwin that kind of gives an insight to the fear or the resentment white Americans have towards what they did to the African American population. And it is, in most, not all, giving them some inner strife. And like James Baldwin said, creating criminals and monsters of them. The manner in which James Baldwin's changed throughout his career is not in his writing, or he continued to write about social activists or civil rights till his death. What did change was his area in which he lived. After Martin Luther King and Malcolm X passed, James Baldwin moved back to France. He was targeted as much as those two gentlemen were, and felt that for him to continue his writing, he would need a safer space to do so. Excuse me. There's not too many things I would change about James Baldwin's career. Matter of fact, no one comes to mind. He was a prolific writer that was able to reach many audience, and especially to now be here in 2020 and reading his work and still feeling as though those words still mean so much. This speaks to his greatness and his influence that he had on all of Americans. So thank you for paying attention to my lecture on James Baldwin, a poet, a lecturer, a novelist, an essayist, and an American.